I think additional progress was made, and we continue to be realistic about how difficult this is, but optimistic, particularly given the fact that as we've made progress, I think there's a shared vision here that this is not just about ending the war, which is very important. It is about securing Ukraine's future, a future that we hope will be more prosperous than it's ever been.
That was Secretary of State Marco Rubio after holding peace talks with Ukraine over the weekend. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff now on his way to Moscow to continue the talks after successful negotiations in Florida over the weekend. Vladimir Putin saying on Friday that Russia is ready to hold serious discussions for peace. Meanwhile, the Russian military continuing to attack Ukrainian cities, hitting the country's supply lines from the air using fairly cheap drones. They've really had a couple of strikes on Kyiv that have become worrisome. Heritage Foundation Center for National Security and former Pentagon official Brent Sadler is with me now. And I'm curious what you think Steve Witkoff is looking for. What can he actually accomplish when he goes to Moscow?
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me back on your show. I mean, we've heard this broken record from Moscow before, that Putin is ready to enter into serious negotiations only to be strung along. So what's clear is there has to be real tangible changes on the battlefield before any deal is struck or before anything is given up on the U.S. and Ukrainian side. And I think, sadly, it's going to still take more real pressure and cost on the battlefield as well as the pocketbook to get on Putin to change his tack. And I mean secondary sanctions that really bite on Chinese entities that are supplying materials as well as finances to Moscow. India's continued purchase of Russia. There needs to be an alternative provided, preferably American energy. And, of course, weapons on the battlefield that will actually cause Putin to pause, like long-range strike weapons like Tomahawks.
Well, and also, you know, President Zelensky has got some domestic issues he's dealing with, and Liz Peek wanted to ask you about that. Liz, go ahead.
Good morning, Brent. The question is Zelensky seriously weakened by the corruption scandal that has spread in Ukraine? Does this mean that the Ukrainian negotiating position is weaker? And does Putin, is he now taking advantage of that? I mean, clearly, Putin has not really wanted peace. I don't know what he wants, honestly, but do you think that this is a major change in the negotiations?
Well, I think it doesn't help that Ukraine had to change out one of their lead negotiator because of this the latest of a series of corruption scandals. It's one of the reasons why the President of Heritage Foundation almost 2 years ago said don't give blank checks, don't provide cash when the Ukrainians really need missiles, tanks, aircraft. And that hasn't changed. But for the United States, the interest is that this war end on terms that are satisfying to America, which means a lasting peace, a Ukraine that's sovereign and independent, can decide which alliances it wants to enter into with no preconditions, so that we can focus in on deterring what is becoming a very dangerous Eastern Asia war potential with China.
Well, I do want to move on to some other issues of the day with you, Brett, because tensions are quickly escalating between the U.S. and Venezuela. President Trump declaring the Venezuelan airspace closed entirely. Now, Nicolas Maduro has been fighting back against that. He says this is, quote, a colonialistic threat to sovereignty. But President Trump doubled down on his decisions on Air Force One last night. Watch this.
We consider Venezuela to be not a very friendly country. They sent millions of people, really, and probably a number in excess of that. And a lot of those people shouldn't be in our country, from jails, from gangs, from drug dealers, from all of the people that came into our country shouldn't have been in our country, causing a lot of problems.
Does your warning
and drugs.
Does your warning mean that an airstrike is imminent, or should we not read it that way?
Don't read anything into it.
So, Brett, the question there is really, as reported, are there going to be land strikes in Venezuela? But I also want to add another layer to this with you before your response, because also last night, President Trump was asked about that first airstrike that happened in the Caribbean against narco-terrorism, the strike that came from the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and the Pentagon. Listen to this reporter back and forth over what occurred with that boat strike and how the president responded. Watch.
Can you talk a little bit about the strikes and the controversy around Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth?
I don't know anything about it. He said he did not say that, and I believe him 100%.
So you don't know if there was
You're talking about the two men?
The second strike to kill the two men.
No, he said he didn't do it. He said he never said
Would
that.
you be okay with that if he did?
He said he didn't do it, so I don't have to make that decision.
What is with a boat strike? If there were a second strike that killed wounded people, wounded in a first strike? Are you
Well,
thinking
number
that
one,
would
I
be
don't.
legal?
Yeah,
You
number
think that's
one, I
illegal?
don't know that happened. And Pete said he did not want them. He didn't even know what people were talking about. So we'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted that. Not a second strike. The first strike was very lethal. It was fine, and if there were two people around. But Pete said that didn't happen.
And, all this controversy, Brent, you've got people, especially on the Senate Armed Services Committee, you've had comments coming from Senator Roger Wicker, Senator Jack Reed. They want investigations, all of this. Mark Kelly was on the morning shows yesterday talking about it. Where are we with all of this?
Well, I think we're probably in a discovery phase, and I think Congress should do its due diligence. But what they should not be allowed to become in the media and in public discourse is trying to change American policies through rumor and innuendo and nameless whistleblowers. If the whistleblower exists and actually was in the room and actually heard this, then that person should be afforded every protection and should be brought before Congress to testify so that we can hear it and then go forward on the judgments of it. But right now, it's innuendo, it's rumor, and I think what's going on right now is in the U.S. nation's best interest.
Well, obviously, to stop the flow of drugs. I mean, we heard yesterday from administration officials that, these boats being stopped. I mean, we're talking about 45 million lives saved because of the fact that they are bringing in drugs into our country. At the same time, how far do you think the political risk goes? And are there any legal questions that we should be asking about these strikes?
Well, from the very beginning, I think as long as these strikes are occurring in international airspace and international waters, it's where the cartels are weakest. It's where they have to move their products in order to make their money, to keep their power. So keep hitting them there, and I think there's a very strong case to be made for that, both from an operational and perhaps from a legal perspective. But clearly this leader, this president, Maduro in Venezuela, is not recognized by the plurality, the vast majority of nations in Latin America. Certainly is bad for Americans' well-being as well as their national security. And many countries in the world share that same view, to include Europeans that have voted for the same cartel gang that Maduro is accused of being a part of as being a narco-terrorist group as well. So we are in league with a lot of countries in going after Maduro's narco regime.
And immigration has been, and of course, the war against the drug cartels, which are kind of been the same. If you look at the southern border, those two things have been very popular with Republican voters. Brent Sadler, it's always great to speak with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Have a good morning.